it's a nice start, I thought.
They can build a commune in Canada. What are they going to do when it becomes the 51st state?
Welcome to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM for Thursday, May 15th. I'm Andrew Walworth, and I'm joined by RCP co-founder and president Tom Bevan and Washington bureau chief Carl Cannon. So, gentlemen, Rahm Emanuel was on The View yesterday. He was trying out some talking points for what sounded to many like a potential presidential run. He's an interesting guy. He served in the House. He was chief of staff to Bill Clinton, mayor of Chicago, ambassador to Japan. Pretty impressive resume. Here's a little bit of what he told the ladies on The View.
Everybody in this audience, they just want one thing, their kids to have a shot. And the problem is Washington's giving them the shaft. And that is wrong.
This sounds very
like a presidential candidate.
You sound like a presidential candidate.
No, I am in training. I don't know if I'll make the Olympics, though.
So, Tom, he's in training. He doesn't know if he'll make the Olympics. Not too subtle. He's running, I guess, right?
Yeah, most politicians are kind of coy when they're asked, oh, I'm focused on what I'm doing. He was just kind of like, yeah, I'm going to go for it, pretty much. Look, I think Rahm is, he's a smart guy, obviously. He is going to have, and he's clearly carving out sort of a more centrist middle lane approach. He's been doing, writing op-eds for the Washington Post. He's been going on the talk circuit and basically saying, look, Democrats have to do away with all this, gender craziness, and we just have to focus on, safe kids, safe schools, safe communities, sort of the basics, right? The bread and butter of governance. And that is a message that a lot of Democrats believe is their ticket back out of the wilderness and in the White House. Rahm has proven that he can deliver that message. He's won, as you mentioned, as a congressman, as a mayor. However, he did not win re-election as mayor because of the case that involving Laquan McDonald, who's an African-American teen here in Chicago, who shot 16 times by the police, and Rahm covered it up, basically, participated in the cover-up of that. And a lot of folks on the left have never, ever forgiven him for it. And that will certainly come up if he decides to run for president.
Yeah, so Carl, Tom makes an interesting point, which is there's this sort of this central lane where a lot of people think that that's the road back to the White House. Unfortunately, you've got to win the primaries to get the nomination, and when it comes to that, people like Rahm Emanuel might not be the right stuff, right?
Well, that's the dilemma for the Democrats. So people talk about Kentucky's governor Andy Beshear because he's won election in a state that's gone Republican in presidential elections. He's a Democrat. Gavin Newsom, who we've talked about before, is talked about in this lane. And what's interesting about Newsom is that he was considered a progressive. As mayor of San Francisco, he was the first one to marry gays when it was illegal. But he's in recent, and Susan Crabtree's written about this for us, in recent months, he's sort of tacked, it seems, to the middle on these cultural issues. And, now he wants to, clean up the homeless encampments in California. There's a sense there that Democrats, that the mainstream of the party, I would say the old Clinton wing of the party, and Rahm Emanuel worked in the Clinton White House. James Carville has talked about this. He was a key advisor at Clinton. They've said, we've lost working Americans with our focus on some of these issues that strike people as more esoteric, transgender issues and some of these other issues. And they haven't said they were wrong about them. But they've said, let's concentrate on something else. And that's, the theory is, Andy, as you point out, that's a winning message in a general election campaign. But there's an aspect to the party. We learned this in the primaries in the Republican primaries last time. So the base has the MAGA base in the Republican Party, the progressive base in the Democratic Party, exhibits disproportionate power. So can you, it's like they can't get there from here. How can you even nominate a person like that? Or will the person come through be someone from the left who would win the primaries? Frank Luntz was on the pollster and political pundit, who's a very centrist guy, was a Republican, now is an independent. He was on Gavin Newsom's podcast, and he said that this thing that AOC and Bernie Sanders are doing, getting these big crowds going around, stirring up the base, the resistance, he says that's the wrong message. He said that's not the Democrats have to be aspirational and they have to be problem solvers. That's how they get their mojo back. But
I'm sure the Democrats are eager to take advice from Frank Luntz on how to move forward. Look, another thing that's really interesting, right? J.B. Pritzker was on CNN the other day, and he's clearly running for president. Well, he has a decision to make, right? He can run for a third term here in Illinois, but people are thinking that he may run for president. And if he does decide to run for president and not run for re-election, Rahm Emanuel may run for governor of the state of Illinois. So we'll have to see how those pieces fall into place. Rahm may, if Pritzker decides,
is Rahm trying to bait J.B. Pritzker into
he
running?
might
So he
be,
can
yeah.
run for
No, there might be a little bit of chess being played here between these two, and obviously they're taking different tacks. J.B. Pritzker is as far to the left as you can be on all of these social issues, and just finished, upbraiding Democrats for not being, fighting hard enough against the Trump administration. So he's running in that AOC Bernie lane.
Yeah. So, Tom, there was this poll, we talked about it off camera before, about who voters see as a sort of face of the Democratic Party. It was pretty interesting. And I think you got the numbers right
It's not Gavin. It's not Andy Bashir.
No, 26% of voters say no one is the face of the Democratic Party. 26% say it's AOC, Sanders 12%, Jessamine Crockett of Texas 8%, Harris 6%, Buttigieg 5%. I don't even think your governor friend, Carl.
I think you got 2%. But Jasmine Crockett, the people who answer affirmative that are Republicans. You understand?
Well, yeah. Now you should point out this is a poll of voters, not Democrats.
That's who they say. Yeah, this is who the Democrats are.
All right.
But we've seen other polling that suggests that Democrats very much like AOC. They still like Bernie. And to the point that Carl was making, I mean, they are flying around and they're getting 20, 25, 30,000 people to show up at their rallies. And they are pushing a very much a left-wing progressive message. And so, it's going to be, now, I think there can only be one person in that lane. And theoretically, although I think we're going to have a massive field, eventually it'll probably get whittled down to a couple of candidates. And if it's a progressive versus a centrist, who's going to win that battle? I mean, last time they consolidated around Biden, who you remember in those primaries, he was saying he's for evolution, not revolution. And that ended up winning the day because they were desperate to beat Donald Trump. This time around, they're going to be trying to beat probably J.D. Vance or someone else. So maybe they're not going to be as cautious, and maybe they'll give in and go with their hearts instead of their heads and select AOC at 35 years old to be run for president of the United States.
Something we've talked about this Jake Tapper book a lot lately, but one aspect of it, Carl, that I think is interesting is that, it does raise this question. If you're running in a Democratic primary, crowded field, it's, bare knuckles stuff, right? I mean, when these big primaries run out, people don't hold back. Are the people who were closest to Biden in his administration, I'm thinking Pete Buttigieg, I'm thinking Kamala Harris, anyone in the cabinet, anyone who sort of was meeting with him on a regular basis, are they going to be vulnerable because they're going to have to stand up in front of the American people and they're going to be attacked by other Democrats saying you were part of this conspiracy which ended up making us lose the 2024 election?
I think that's right, Andy. And the two people you named specifically have a problem. Pete Buttigieg, who is Commerce Secretary, he may have a problem Transportation Secretary.
Yeah.
He may have a problem for how he ran the airlines, but he was making excuses. I assume Jake Tapper interviewed him. Kamala Harris may be the biggest problem, but that's the first level. Then the second level is the surrogates. Gavin Newsom was full-throated in support of Biden all during this, and even after that fateful debate. So were Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez after the debate, still for Biden. And it makes me wonder if a person, J.B. Pritzker on the left, Bashir or Rahm Emanuel in the middle, maybe someone who just isn't touched by that, or maybe even a name we're not even talking about now, someone who had nothing to do with Biden, or helped get rid of him, George Clooney, maybe a person like that. It depends how big Tom and I, well, I don't think you disagree, Andy. We think this cover up of Biden's mental acuity is one of the greatest scandals in American political history. I don't know how much legs it has. I don't know if the voters will agree with me or agree with us, but there are, there's the first level of responsibility, then the secondary, then the tertiary. I think a candidate who had nothing to do with that has an advantage going in. To your point.
Well, I think the question, Tom, too, is will the if you're an outsider, if you're a governor, say, will you go there? Will you attack the insiders in the heat of the debates and the primary on this very topic? Because that's one of the things that will give the story legs and keep it going.
And that's a high risk strategy. I mean, I think Democrats still feel like favorably toward Biden. They still think he was a good president. They don't necessarily, they want to focus on Donald Trump and people who are willing to, and quite frankly, Jake Tapper, I mean, and Alex Thompson, this book, if you go look at some of the stuff that they posted on X and some of these other places, and you look in the comments, yes, they're getting a ton of shit from the right, but they're also getting a ton of shit from the left who say, I can't believe you wasted all this time writing a book about Joe Biden when you should be covering Donald Trump. He's unfit to serve right now. And how dare you? And, it is going to be a high risk strategy for someone to go out there and go after Pete Buttigieg or Kamala Harris by saying, you guys participated in this cover up, and me, well, I just talked to him a couple times on the phone, so I didn't know anything.
Well, Tom, isn't the way they'll finesse it? They'll say, yeah, you did that. You got Trump reelected by going with this charade, so that they can.
Well, yes. But again, we'll see whether that's a fruitful line of attack in a Democratic primary.
Yeah, right. Well, we're going to have to leave it there. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom and Carl. Don't go away. When we come back, we're going to talk about what happened at the Supreme Court today. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom and Carl. And guys, the Supreme Court debated whether judges can pause the Trump administration's restrictions on birthright citizenship. That's the constitutional right of all persons born within the U.S. to U.S. citizenship. And the wrinkle, if you want to call it that, is that the administration is arguing this largely not on a constitutional basis, but on their view that the judges who ruled against them don't have the right to make what are called nationwide injunctions. So a lot of stake, Carl, here, because these nationwide or universal injunctions have been used to challenge a lot of what Trump's agenda is, and especially his executive orders, cuts to the federal workforce, DEI reform. What do you make of the arguments you've heard so far today?
Well, you don't want to risk a lot of money. The Preakness is coming up in a couple of days. I'll risk money on that, but you don't want to risk a lot of money on predicting Supreme Court decisions based on the oral arguments. Sometimes you can be misled. Sometimes the judges are drawing you out. And in this case, of course, on this court, which is pretty polarized, you're talking about 2 or 3 judges in the middle, justices. But what I heard, and I listened to oral arguments, is the justices were more skeptical of the president's position on birthright citizenship. Now, that was considered settled law. Trump's theory was considered a fringe legal theory, until recently. They didn't seem terribly receptive to that. And Elena Kagan said flatly it was just wrong and wasn't contradicted by any other justice. But they also seem skeptical of this idea that U.S. district court judges around the country, and Tom's pointed out when we've talked about this previously, local U.S. district court judges sought by the plaintiffs because they're presumed sympathetic to the liberal point of view, that they can issue nationwide injunctions stopping all these things that Trump has done. So I don't know how they're going to square that. Elena Kagan she seemed to see this coming. She said, "Oh, okay, but this thing is wrong. So how are they supposed to stop it? What are they supposed to do?" And then Justice Jackson said, "What are you going to have states where, the states decide it differently? You're going to have different jurisdictions. So birthright citizenship's legal in California, but not in Texas." And the more they got to talking, you realize what a mess this is. And so, but I think they wanted, the court's always trying to decide on narrow procedural grounds, but that's getting hard to do.
Yeah.
but I guess what did you guys hear? What I heard was that they're they don't think much of Trump's idea of birthright citizenship, at least for now. And I guess that issue is going to come to them in time, but that they were uncomfortable with some of these universal injunctions.
Tom?
Yeah, I mean, look, it is a problem. This is something, again, and Clarence Thomas mentioned that, asked the administration's lawyer, when was the first instance of nationwide injunctions? It's like 1963. And so this is, and they've become much more prominent over the last, 10, 15 years. And so, and a lot of them have been against Trump. And we've talked
Most
about
of
that.
them.
Most of them, yeah, like a large majority of them have been used against Trump. And as Carl mentioned, this is, this is not sort of random. They go Democrats, progressives, they'll file a lawsuit, they'll go judge shopping, they'll get it in a court where they, have a judge who's sympathetic to their cause, and boom, he or she issues a ruling and it stops everything nationwide. And what the administration is arguing is those judges should only be able to stop the proceedings for the people who come before them, right? Individual cases. And if they wanted to do something broader, they have to file a class action suit and then take it to the Supreme Court. And so, and then, the liberal justices were saying, well, why would, if that's the case and you can just ignore these injunctions by these district court judges, why would you ever take it to the Supreme Court and risk an adverse ruling? You could just leave it there in legal limbo. So both sides have decent arguments. So I'm not sure how the court is going to rule. And again, as Carl mentioned, you've got your three liberals and you've got three staunch conservatives or four staunch conservatives. And then you've got a couple folks in the middle, as you always have. Amy Coney Barrett's one of them. Gorsuch is the other, I think. Maybe John Roberts is a third. And who knows? They have been not always reliable votes for conservatives. And so I think this is going to be a close one. But it's a pretty monumental ruling because this is how progressives have resorted to trying to thwart Trump. I mean, they can't do it in Congress. They obviously can't. They don't have a lot of power against the White House, and so this has been their only lever that they've been pulling on repeatedly. And if they don't have it anymore, it's going to be a lot harder for them to stop the administration's agenda.
Yeah, and I think people should remember, too, that, this is not just a Trump thing. This is sort of an executive thing. Trump is not the first president to sort of get his back up about these judges. Certainly, the Biden administration was brushed back in a similar way on a couple issues.
On the loans, the student loans.
Yeah. So it just
Which
happens
he
to be the
promptly
Trump
said that he would ignore.
Yes, right. Yeah. I'm just, you wonder how the arguments would be different if it was a Democrat pushing this.
You don't really wonder, Andy. It's 100% situational ethics now in Washington, isn't it?
Even on the Supreme Court? I mean, that's my question.
No, not on the court. Not on the court.
Yeah. So, so it is pretty interesting because it seemed to me to be a pretty good day for the White House because they were able to keep the argument sort of on these sort of procedural grounds, because the idea that they're going to sort of revoke birthright citizenship, Carl, that's a much higher and harder lift for them, right? I mean, this is considered settled law. No one should use that term.
Didn't seem ready to do that, did they?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Well, I want to talk about something else here. There are three Yale professors who are leaving for Canada. Jason Stanley, Marcy Shore, and her husband, Timothy Snyder. They're all going to the University of Toronto. They're leaving America, and this is according to Shore. She told the New York Times, the lesson of 1933 is that you get out sooner rather than later. Americans who think the country is safe are, quote, like people on the Titanic saying our ship can't sink. So, Carl, what do you make of that? I mean, is this really time to get out of the country because this is Germany in 1933?
Of course not. What I was focused on, these are molders of young minds. We wonder why these demonstrations on college campuses against Israel are taking place. We wonder what are they being taught? Well, now we know what they're being taught. They're being taught gibberish. They're being taught bizarre historical examples. They're being taught to panic and be hysterical and illogical and to, catastrophize current affairs. So that's what they're being taught. And that's how they're often acting. So, 3 down, 3 or 4,000 more to go. It's a nice start, I thought.
They can build a commune in Canada. What are they going to do when it becomes the 51st state? I don't know. Then they're going to have to move somewhere else.
Yeah, it is a problem. The other thing is that I sort of tried to sort through the coverage of this. I couldn't figure out. It doesn't sound like they're giving up their citizenship. It doesn't sound like they're. As a matter of fact, one of them said Stanley said he hopes for the opportunity to return to Yale at some point. So he's just taking this. Not a sabbatical, but he's going to a different university. They probably offered him a better salary or something.
Yeah, but I wonder about is it a tax dodge? I mean, what are they really doing?
Well, I think what they're I shouldn't say.
They're
I don't
virtue
know.
signaling.
Yeah, I think they're virtue signaling is the impression I get.
It was a video essay in the New York Times is how they, presented themselves. Yeah. And so, look, I think even Nate Silver said this is just purely performative. I mean, it's just when you've got folks on the left who are dinging you for this.
Nate Silver's he's a pretty sensible person.
Mm-hmm. Well, what about Bruce?
He's not really on the left.
I want to talk about Bruce Springsteen as well.
Stop it.
Carl.
Yes, sir.
You're Springsteen.
Speaking of people on the left.
Yeah. Now he's over in Manchester, England. He's on tour right now. He's 75 years old. He got new records coming out soon. When I say records, I think it's a collection of unreleased stuff. We'll see how good it is. But his concerts out there sound more like political rallies than anything else at this point. What do you make of the boss?
Yeah, look, I love Bruce Springsteen. I love his music. I've been to 6 or 8 of his concerts. I can sing most of those early songs, at high decibels, not in the shower, but along with Bruce on the radio. And he's always been a political person. He's been a man of the left, and his concerts always had a fair dose of that, especially during election years. He seems to he didn't like Reagan, he didn't like Bush, he loathes Trump. That's part of the package. I was always willing to look past it. I don't begrudge him his views, and I share some of them, but this is a little too much. I wouldn't be comfortable at a concert that's really a political rally. That's maybe because it's a busman's holiday for us. Andy, you play music at night. You play music to get away from politics. Same reason we play golf. I saw a clip of it. I read about it. And it made me a little uncomfortable and disappointed me just a little bit.
Yeah. In October of last year, this was in an ABC interview he gave to George Stephanopoulos. He said at that point he wanted his shows to be apolitical, and this is the quote. He said, "People know where I stand for the most part, but I also wanted a space where people feel they can come and be with their neighbors, regardless of what their particular political point of view is at any given moment."
That's his instinct, but he has given in to other instincts, and those are his.
If that's his goal, he's failing. I mean, I watched the clip. This was like a 2-minute, rant, and talking about, the president's unfit, a rogue administration, and all this stuff. It's like, dude, just stop. I mean, go to Canada with the Yale professors. I mean, be done with it. If that's how you feel, put your money where your mouth is and just leave, and you'll feel better, and we'll feel better because we don't have to listen to your political rants when we're trying to. I was never a huge Springsteen fan. I didn't dislike him, but I wasn't a huge fan. So I won't be sorry to see him go.
All right. Well, I don't think he's moving to Canada.
He's not going anywhere, Andy.
Yeah,
He's the Bard.
He's coming back to New Jersey.
Yeah, he's going to play. He'll play at Gavin Newsom's inauguration.
Yeah. God, one more Gavin Newsom quote. All right.
Carl, just want to give everybody one last shot.
One last shot.
On your way out the door.
If you're doing the Gavin Newsom drinking game on Real Clear Politics, today was a very rich day for you. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm talking with Tom and Carl. Don't go away. We'll be back with more Real Clear Politics right after these words.
Welcome back to the show. I'm Carl Cannon, Washington Bureau Chief of Real Clear Politics, talking now with Peter Berkowitz, friend of the show, columnist, regular columnist for Real Clear, senior fellow at the Hoover Institution, former State Department official, an expert on Israel. Peter, President Trump's gone on this Mideast trip, did not go to Israel. Made news. A lot of the news has been about this oddball idea of getting a gift plane from Qatar. But let's talk about the more substantive foreign policy developments there, because he made an overture to Iran. I don't frankly understand the parameters of it or what he's trying to do. And he made news, an extraordinary overture to Syria, where he praised a man who a year or two ago had a $10 million U.S. bounty on his head. What is going on?
What is going on? Excellent question. Let's give it first the most charitable interpretation. President Trump is trying to build partnerships in the Middle East for the United States based on commerce. He gave a speech 2 days ago, an aggressive speech in which he denounced 20 years or more of American foreign policy in the Middle East, said no more nation building. He implied, not based on human rights, let's base foreign policy in the Middle East on commerce. Let's advance America's interests by doing business deals with Saudi Arabia, with Qatar, which includes, sticks in the craw for many of us, $400 million gift from the Qataris. Even the Syrians, why not give them a shot? Never mind that their leader is a longtime Sunni Muslim jihadist. He's now wearing a suit and a tie. Maybe we can do business with him. Let's see. I assure you the Israelis are skeptical of that possibility. But if we focus for a moment, we have pro-Western monarchies in the Gulf. Saudi Arabia, Emirates. Qatar is much more difficult to characterize because it seems simultaneously pro-Western and anti-Western. But if the president were able to further secure these monarchies, then a kind of American sphere of influence, this would be consistent with the strong strand of American foreign policy that says commerce is a basis for developing partnerships and friendships for America.
Let me ask you about that, though, because I remember this was a very strong theme at the end of the Cold War. And it wasn't like now, not a strictly partisan or even ideological point. There were people who bought it, people who didn't on both sides of the aisle. But the idea was that, Russia, the old Soviet Union, and China would both embrace human rights because they believed in free markets and the free marketplace of ideas. The Reason magazine slogan, free minds, free markets, that it was of a piece. What it turned out is that they like access to our markets. They like capitalism. Crony capitalism is how they practice it, but they didn't like human rights. They thought, oh yeah, we're not going to take that part of it. They sort of took what was just, the old, what a liberal would have thought at the time, sort of the worst of America, not the best of it. So I count me skeptical. I don't. It seems to me this has been tried before. Am I being too unfair?
A tad unfair for this reason. Although maybe when I say this, maybe you think you're being too fair. Trump did not make in the last 2 days, he hasn't made the old argument that you're describing, which is that economic liberalization will produce political liberalization. He's just saying, let's do business that will produce friendship. He's not making the bolder claim, which may make your criticism harsher. It certainly raises questions in my mind, but we cannot accuse him of making the old mistake.
Okay, fair point. But let me try it another way before I do a brief station break. You're listening to Peter Berkowitz, senior fellow at the Hoover Institution at Stanford University, former State Department official, regular columnist for Real Clear Politics. I'm Carl Cannon, Washington bureau chief. You're listening to us on Sirius XM or watching our podcast. Peter, what it reminds me of, and you like presidents to play to their strengths. I always tell young writers, write what you know. George W. Bush, who was intensely interested in human rights, more like Jimmy Carter on this score than the RealPolitics of Henry Kissinger. And he used to say over and over again, Islam is a religion of peace. That's what he would say. There's a little evidence for that, but it was an aspirational claim. And certainly there are hundreds of millions of practicing Muslims who are primarily interested in peace. So I took his point. But he had this view that, and he would say in one speech, he said, freedom is not America's gift to the world. It's God's gift to every man and woman in the world. It's a lovely sentiment, aspirational. Yeah. I wanted to believe it. And Trump's view is, he doesn't talk like that, but we can all do business. We'll trade, we'll cool the tensions. We won't want wars because wars get in the way of business. And I don't mean to be pejorative about it. Wars, make things worse economically for people all over the world. And if we're doing commerce, then we can concentrate on these other things. But just as George W. Bush found out, not everybody's interested in peace. Not everybody's interested in freedom. And I think that President Trump is maybe making a mistake here. Maybe if Iran was just interested in commerce, they could have had that years ago. They could have done things that we would have dropped all the sanctions. They could have stopped supporting terrorism mainly, and quit going around calling us the great Satan and trying to destroy Israel and do all the stuff they do. If that was really what motivated them, they could have had this already.
True. However, I think that Trump is not actually undertaking a parallel transformative mission. Here's why. He's not inviting the Saudis and the Emiratis to abandon one way and adopt commerce. He's noticing that MBS in Saudi Arabia and MBZ in the United Arab Emirates are keenly interested in commerce. The UAE, part of the reason for the UAE entering the Abraham Accords, first Trump administration, was the commercial potential. So the point is that Trump's not trying to transform these countries. He's trying to take advantage of commercial tendencies that they've strongly demonstrated. So I'm not worried that Trump once again is repeating a transformative error. I am worried that the president has gone too far in eliminating human rights entirely from our calculations. I'm sympathetic to grounding partnerships in hard, cold commercial interests, but I'd like the president to retain some room for standing for American principles.
What about this, this Steve Witkoff, who's his head negotiator with all these, with Ukraine and Russia, with Syria, with Iran. Here's a man, Donald Trump trusts him implicitly. He's a loyal person. I'm sure he's a capable person and a decent person, but he has no expertise in either diplomacy or international relations. It seems like he's an amateur. And I guess the pushback to that, if Tucker Carlson was here with us, he'd say, well, look at all the messes the experts got us in. Point well taken. But I sometimes wonder if the president is putting too much on this guy who really doesn't have experience in this part of the world.
I believe that experience is important in almost all undertakings, and certainly in the undertaking of diplomacy. In the best of all possible worlds, our diplomats focusing on Iran would be deeply immersed in Middle East politics, Middle East history, in the language, in the politics. By the way, in the technicalities of nuclear programs. That is all desirable. That said, the news coming out of the Middle East today, and there have been conflicting reports in previous days, but today, the news coming out is that President and his chief envoy, Steve Witkoff, are not only seeking a deal on the nuclear program, but they're tying to this a deal on Iran's intercontinental ballistic program, and they're also demanding that Iran cease funding jihadist proxies throughout the region. That is a big improvement on the Obama and Biden administration. It is a continuation of the maximum pressure campaign that Mike Pompeo led. So I share your worries, but I'm willing to give them a few more weeks. And if I just may add this point, the big bone of contention for the Israelis, and we American hawks on the Iran question is the United States going to demand the total dismantling of the program, or is the United States going to rest content with mostly dismantling the program? Many of us think that mostly dismantling the program will mean, in effect, allowing the Iranians to continue to enrich uranium beyond what they need for a civil program.
I have to tell you, Peter, after what happened on October a year ago, these proxies, Hamas, wholly owned subsidiary of Iran, the atrocities that they committed in Israel and the rhetoric that accompanies it, and calls for genocide around the world of Jews, makes me think that Iran can never have a bomb, full stop. And I think that's a consensus in Israel too. But I don't know that Donald Trump has said this. Does he really believe it? 30 seconds. Is that important to the Trump administration?
Trump has said this. This is the Israel view. As you say, Trump has said Iran can never have a bomb. They can agree to abandon their program peacefully, if not through force. We will see in the coming weeks how far the president is willing to go in backing up this rhetoric. I hope he backs it up.
All right. Well, that's going to do it for us right now. You've been listening to Peter Berkowitz, senior fellow at the Hoover Institution and a columnist for Real Clear Politics. I'm Carl Cannon, Washington bureau chief for RCP, and we'll be right back with more on SiriusXM right after this.
Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth, and I'm talking with John Feehery. He's a Republican strategist and a principal at the firm EFB Advocacy. John, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Andy. Good to see you.
Yeah, great to see you again. So we come to you when we have news on the Hill. We've been tracking the various pieces of legislation that are supposed to come together into that one big, beautiful budget bill that the president wants. The latest is that today the House Agriculture Committee advanced changes to the SNAP program to help pay for the federal spending cuts that the White House would like to see. Democrats are critical, but they don't really have the votes. So all the real action is within the Republican caucus. Where do we stand, and what are the chances this bill gets through the House and onto the Senate?
I think the chances are very good. The Ways and Means Committee passed their bill, I think, yesterday morning. Energy and Commerce Committee passed their bill, and then Agriculture passed their bill today. So those are the hardest three committees to get stuff done, because they were the Ways and Means Committee, had a lot of concerns about the state and local tax issue, which is SALT, and they're still trying to sort that out. But Energy and Commerce and Agriculture had the bulk of the spending cuts, and that's where you always have, some controversies. But I think some Republicans are going to be very unhappy up until they end up voting for the bill, and then they'll be happy. And this is all kind of a normal part of a reconciliation process. Reconciliation is mostly a process for the Senate, but the House has to go through it. And basically what it does is it has a number in their mind which everyone has to mark up to. And it's pretty much every committee in the House, other than the Intelligence Committee and the Ethics Committee, have to mark up to that certain number. And all the committees have done what they're supposed to do. And, it's now it's in the hands of the whip and the leader and the speaker, and then ultimately the president, who's going to have to crack some heads and get these guys to vote for it who say they don't want to vote for it.
Yeah. So I do the math. I think Mike Johnson can lose 3 Republicans if the rest of the caucus holds, and if the Democrats all hold, which I guess is a pretty good bet at this point. So what is the major stumbling block, do you think? Is it the SALT cap issue?
Well, I think that the moderates are the ones who tend to lately fold, and they got a pretty good deal for increasing the deduction from 10,000 to 30,000. I think they're trying to go to 45,000, which would be a happy medium point. I mean, the big issue is that for Jason Smith, he was saying that if you have a combined income of $400,000, you probably don't need this deduction. You probably have enough money. But there's a lot of folks in New York who don't think that $400,000 is rich. If you're from Jason Smith's district, where the average salary, the average person makes about $24,000 a year, $400,000 seems like a lot. So this is a perfect example of how different geographies react differently to to the same set of facts. I think that's the big issue. You have on the other side conservatives who don't think that there's enough spending cuts. Chip Roy especially is unhappy that they didn't cut Medicaid enough. But I'm a little skeptical because Roy has a kind of a history of saying I'm not going to vote for something and then gets a call from the president and caves. So I would imagine that most conservatives are going to try to do what the president wants.
And, it raises a question about Mike Johnson, the speaker. What kind of grade do you give him on this? Because it seems like he's been pretty effective in keeping his caucus together so far, at least.
I give him an A+. I think he's done a remarkable job of getting his caucus together. I mean, having such a slender majority, and really he never gets upset. He's always very even keeled. He also has credibility because he says that we're going to do something, and they tend to do it. And I think that no one really expected them to be able to get this tax bill through the Ways and Means Committee, but working with the president and obviously working with Chairman Jason Smith, they were able to get that done. And then, kind of the underrated hero of this for the Republican perspective is Brett Guthrie, who's the chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee. He's kind of a mild-mannered guy, but he was able to get a lot more spending cuts that people thought were going to be able to get done through the Energy and Commerce Committee, and in a way that helped the Republicans cut more taxes. So, this is the process. Johnson deserves a ton of credit. He's still a relatively new speaker, but he seems like he's growing into the job quite nicely.
Yeah, and what is he doing right? I mean, when you look at his speakership, because, again, he sort of came out of nowhere. I mean, for those of us who don't follow the Hill as closely as you did, I had never heard of him even before he ended up in the speakership. And then there's all these challenges to him along the way. People thought, he's got more lives than a cat. I mean, but how does he get it done? What's the secret behind it?
Well, he has the president behind him, so he's in full communication with President Trump, and Trump is the 600-pound gorilla when it comes to getting his way on the Hill. And he's got a lot of credibility, especially with all of what's going on in the Middle East. And he seems to be cutting deals left and right, so that makes it a lot easier for him to come in and tell Republicans, "Hey, you need to be with me on this." I think the other thing he doesn't overpromise and underdeliver. He's very matter of fact, and he also seems to have a very good attitude, a very positive attitude, upbeat. Not someone who goes off and starts screaming at people. It's calmness that shows you're in control. And if you have someone who's calm when he's speaker, it does suffuse the whole caucus. And they seem like like Nick Lota from New York said this bill's dead on arrival. Well, it's not dead on arrival because everyone understands that you have to come together and pass it. And then the other thing is, people talk about how slender the majority is. Sam Rayburn used to always say he'd rather have a 1-seat majority than a 100-seat majority, because when you have a slender majority, you're all in this together, and they really can't afford to go all over the place, because once they do that, then they all pay the consequences. I mean, there's some talk that some members of the SALT caucus were saying that we don't have to pass this because the SALT stuff will expire and we'll get all what we want next year anyway. Well, what happens then is you have the whole automatic tax increases on most of the country, including really their district. So that was never really an option. It was just kind of nonsense. And so I think that Johnson's able to see through the nonsense and find partnerships and have a good attitude, and that's really important.
Yeah. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with John Feehery. And John, let's look forward a little bit. We got about 2 minutes left here. Not too early to start talking about the midterms. Conventional wisdom is that the party in power, second year of a presidential reign, loses seats in the House. How do you make, or how are you betting right now in terms of whether the Republicans will be able to keep control of the House?
I wouldn't bet against them. I know it's a very tight majority, but the Democrats are kind of in disarray. They're all over the place. They don't seem to be able to come up with a coherent message. They're spending more time talking about Joe Biden than Donald Trump. Trump is doing pretty well. And I think that, if they're able to get this tax bill through, it should have enough bang for the buck in the economy that it should hit the Republicans or in all these congressional districts right as they're standing up for re-election. And they should be in pretty decent shape. I worked for the last majority that had a president that expanded the majority in his second term. That was George W. Bush in 2002. And we had obviously different issues, most of which had to do with security. But I do think that Trump is in a unique spot because he's not running again, even though some of his members want him to, and he seems to be hitting his stride. And I don't think that there's going to be this big revulsion against Trump that there was in 2018. So I think that that's going to help their House Republicans. So I wouldn't bet against it.
Oh, interesting, because it would be like you say, it doesn't happen often that the president maintains the majority in the House, and it is so slim. If the Republicans do keep the House, that would be quite a triumph for Trump and would sort of set him up for a 4-year run as opposed to what looks like, a lot of people saying he's really got 2 years to get everything done because A, he's a lame duck, and history says that he'll lose the House. So if he maintains the House, which is an interesting prediction, it's a big deal for his presidency. I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
I think that's right. And I think that, he won't be impeached again. His proposals won't be dead on arrival as they just to get to the Senate. And he'll have a little bit more staying power. I mean, the fact is that this is the the last 2 years of his second term. And so the talk is almost automatically going to turn to, who's his successor. And so whoever is his successor, whether it's Rubio or J.D. Vance or whoever, they're going to be in much better shape if Trump is able to keep the House and the Senate, which I think the Senate's going to happen. The House is a little bit more up in the air, but I wouldn't count it out. I would say that right now, I'd say there's a 52% chance that Republicans keep the House, which is better than most pundits give them.
Yeah, well, we like those kinds of predictions here at Real Clear Politics. 52% from John Feehery. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I've been talking with John Feehery. That's our program for today. We'll see you back here tomorrow. Have a great evening.